The lawyer called on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the funeral. Maya almost didn't answer. She was between shifts, sitting in her car in the hospital parking garage eating a sandwich she couldn't taste, watching her phone buzz against the center console like it had somewhere better to be. Daniel Reeves, the lawyer said. Estate matter. A property. She assumed a mistake. Daniel had left her $400 in a joint account, $12,000 in unresolved medical debt, and a 7-year-old son who still set 2 places at the breakfast table every morning without seeming to notice he was doing it. Daniel had not left her a building, except he had. 6 stories, Red Hook, Brooklyn, Van Brunt Street, 2 blocks from the water. The deed was real, the lawyer confirmed, probated and clean, hers if she wanted it. She went on a Tuesday, parked on a street, checked the address twice, and stood on the sidewalk looking at a building that looked back at her with no expression at all. No signage, no visible business, just brick and locked glass, and a quiet that felt deliberate. The door opened before she knocked. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-30s. He had gray eyes and the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm. It came from years of learning that stillness was its own form of power. He said her name, not a question. She asked how he knew it. "Your husband described you," he said. He was very precise. His name was Aleksei Volkov. He held the door open and waited. Maya thought about leaving. She thought about Caleb's tuition, Daniel's debt, the sandwich still sitting uneaten in her car. The office on the ground floor held a desk, 2 chairs, and nothing else. No photographs, no filing cabinets, no evidence that anyone had ever worked here or wanted to. Just concrete walls painted the color of old snow and a single window facing the street with the blinds drawn to the last inch of light. Aleksei Volkov sat behind the desk like it was a position, not a piece of furniture. Maya sat across from him and kept her hand still in her lap. He spoke without preamble, the way men speak when they consider time a limited resource. Daniel had been the building's owner of record for 6 years. His name on the deed, his signature on the city filings, his face at every inspection. What operated inside the building was separate from all of that. The upper floors ran logistics, money movement, coordination between operations that required a fixed address with clean paperwork and no visible connection to anything uncomfortable. Daniel provided the wall, Aleksei said, a clean wall. He was never in the room for anything that mattered, and nothing that mattered was ever in his name. Maya listened without speaking. She had learned in 8 months of grief, and before that in 11 years of marriage to a man who communicated in the spaces between sentences, how to absorb information without letting her face respond to it. She asked one question. Did he know? Aleksei looked at her directly for the first time since she sat down. He knew exactly what he was, he said. He chose it. She wanted to argue that. She filed it away instead. The arrangement going forward was simple, Aleksei explained. Her name stayed on the deed. She signed the same quarterly documents Daniel had signed. She made herself available for inspections and city correspondence. She asked no questions about the upper floors and received no information about them. In exchange, she received a monthly figure that Aleksei wrote on a piece of paper and slid across the desk without ceremony. Maya looked at the number. It was more than she made in 4 months of double shifts. It was Caleb's tuition, Daniel's medical debt, and 12 months of breathing room written in blue ink on a torn piece of notepad paper. She did not pick it up. The alternative, Aleksei continued, was that she declined, walked out, and allowed the people above him, people with longer institutional memories and less patience for uncertainty, to begin asking what Daniel's wife actually knew about what Daniel had actually done for 6 years. He said it without menace. That was the part that stayed with her. He wasn't threatening her. He was describing weather. She asked for 48 hours. He said 24. She stood, shook his hand because some reflex of normalcy demanded it, and walked back through the ground floor to the front door. The man named Dmitri, who had been standing near the stairwell when she arrived and was still standing there when she left, watched her go without bothering to disguise it. Outside, the harbor wind hit her face, and she walked to her car and sat inside it without starting the engine. The street was quiet. A woman walked a dog. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a city that had no idea what had just been said to her in that room. She thought about the man she had married, the way he kissed her forehead when he came home late, the way he answered questions about his work with other questions, gently, so gently she'd never noticed she was being redirected. She thought about Caleb setting 2 places at breakfast. She started the car. She didn't go home. She got on the BQE heading north and drove until the skyline filled the windshield, then pulled onto the shoulder and sat with both hands on the wheel, watching the city hold itself together in the distance. She asked Daniel why out loud, to no one, to the steering wheel, to the 8 months of silence he'd left behind him. The silence answered the way Daniel's silences always had, completely. Maya spent the first hour on the phone. Daniel's lawyer, a careful man named Ashworth, who charged by the minute and spoke like he was being recorded, confirmed only what he'd already confirmed. The deed was legitimate, the probate was clean. Anything beyond the property transfer was outside the scope of his involvement. She asked if Daniel had ever mentioned the building's tenants. Ashworth said he wasn't aware of any tenants. She asked if he was being honest. He said he'd send her the final paperwork by Friday and wished her a good afternoon. She crossed him off the list of people who would help her. The second hour took her to Sunset Park, to a job site off 39th Street, where Daniel's old foreman, a heavy-set man named Curtis, was overseeing a foundation pour. Curtis had come to the funeral, stood in the back, left before the reception. She'd always liked him. He had the face of a man who kept his word. She asked him about Red Hook, about the building, about whether Daniel had ever mentioned it. Curtis watched the concrete pour for a long moment. He said Daniel was a good worker and a good man, and that he was sorry for her loss. Then he looked at her with something that wasn't quite warning and wasn't quite apology, and said he had to get back to the site. She watched him walk away and understood. He knew something. He'd made the calculation that knowing it out loud cost more than he was willing to pay. She didn't blame him. The storage unit took her another hour to find. The rental agreement was under the name D. Cole, her mother's maiden name, Daniel's one sentimental habit, and she only found the key after pulling every card from his old wallet, the one she hadn't been able to throw away. It was taped to the inside back panel, flat and small, and waiting. The unit was orderly in the way Daniel organized everything, deliberately, without wasted space. Construction equipment, labeled boxes of financial records, a duffel bag of clothing she didn't recognize, and on the metal shelf in the back, a fireproof box, gray and solid, with a combination lock she didn't have the code for. She sat on the floor of the storage unit for 10 minutes, trying combinations. His birthday, Caleb's birthday, their anniversary, the year they met. None of them worked. She took the box anyway, locked the unit behind her, and drove home. That evening, she made Caleb dinner and listened to him talk about a project at school involving volcanoes, and she laughed in the right places and asked the right questions, and felt the entire time like she was performing a version of herself 6 months ago, before the phone calls and the paperwork and the building on Van Brunt Street. She put him to bed at 9. Read to him until he was almost asleep, then sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, listening to him breathe.
She went to the kitchen and sat across from Daniel's photograph on the windowsill. It was from their trip to Montreal 3 years before Caleb was born. Daniel was laughing at something off camera, his face open and unguarded in the way it rarely was in stillness. She asked him again, quietly this time, almost gently. He smiled at something she would never know. At 11:40, 20 minutes before Aleksei's deadline, she called the number on the card he'd given her. He answered on the second ring, which told her he'd been waiting. She told him she would sign. He said he would have the documents ready in the morning. She said fine, and ended the call, and sat for a long time in the kitchen with the phone face down on the table, and the city murmuring outside the window, and the fireproof box sitting on the counter, combination unknown, waiting. She was lying about signing. She just needed him to believe she wasn't.
The documents were standard. 2 pages, dense with legal language that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. Maya signed them at Aleksei's desk the following morning with a pen he provided and a steadiness in her hand that surprised her. Aleksei countersigned without comment and gave her a key. "Ground floor and common areas only," he said, "for city purposes, for appearances, for the maintenance of a paper trail that showed an engaged and present owner. She was not to access the upper floors without prior arrangement. She was not to speak to his people beyond basic courtesy. She was not to bring anyone to the building without informing him first." She nodded to all of it. He studied her face for a moment, then stood and offered to walk her through the space. The ground floor was unremarkable. Storage rooms, a utility corridor, the bare office where they'd first spoken. Everything functional, nothing decorative. The kind of space that had been deliberately emptied of personality. The second and third floors were similar. Open rooms with temporary tables, equipment she didn't have names for, cables running along baseboards with the careful organization of people who valued order. 2 men worked on the 3rd floor and didn't look up when she passed. Aleksei didn't introduce them. On the 4th floor landing, he stopped. There was a door at the end of the corridor with a different lock, heavier, newer, installed separately from the building's original hardware. Aleksei did not move toward it, did not explain it, simply allowed the pause to communicate what words would have made too explicit. Maya looked at the door for exactly as long as a curious but compliant woman would look at it. Then she followed him upstairs. The 5th and 6th floors were being used for storage, crates she didn't examine, shelving units covered with canvas. The 6th floor had a window facing the harbor, and she stood at it for a moment, watching a barge move slowly across the gray water, and felt the specific loneliness of standing in a place that belonged to her on paper and to something else entirely, in fact. Dmitri was waiting on the ground floor when they came back down. He was broader than Aleksei, darker, with a quality of attention that felt less like vigilance and more like appetite. He looked at Maya the way men look at complications, measuring the degree of disruption, calculating the simplest resolution. Aleksei introduced him as the building's operations manager. Dmitri shook her hand with exactly enough pressure to make a point without making a scene. "Your husband was reliable," Dmitri said. The past tense landed like it was meant to. Maya thanked him and held his gaze until he looked away first. Lena found her near the exit, mid-40s, precise, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She managed the building's day-to-day, she explained, utilities, maintenance schedules, city correspondence. She would be Maya's primary contact for anything operational. Her tone was professional and entirely neutral, but when she handed Maya a second key card, her eyes held something that wasn't hostility and wasn't welcome. It was recognition, one woman reading another across a room full of men and finding something familiar there. Maya pocketed the key card and said she'd be in touch. Outside, she stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building's face. 6 stories of old Brooklyn brick, windows that gave nothing away, a door that had opened for her this morning with papers and a lie. The 4th floor door was behind her eyes now. Daniel's note was behind that. "Don't go alone."
She turned up her collar against the harbor wind and walked to her car and thought about what alone actually meant when the only person you'd trusted completely had kept a 6-year secret in a building he'd left to you like a confession. She thought about the combination lock on the fireproof box. She thought about the jacket in the back of her closet she still hadn't washed because it still smelled like him. Then she drove home to pick up her son from school.
She found the key on a Sunday. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd been doing what she'd been putting off for 8 months, sorting Daniel's side of the closet, pulling things down from the shelf, making the piles that grief counselors called necessary and that felt instead like a slow amputation. The keep pile, the donate pile, the pile she couldn't decide about yet, which kept growing. His gray jacket was in the donate pile. She'd already folded it. She was reaching past it for a sweater when something made her stop. Some residual instinct she couldn't name, the same instinct that had made her take the fireproof box from the storage unit instead of leaving it. She picked up the jacket and ran her hands along the lining. The seam along the inner left panel had been opened and restitched. Not poorly. Daniel had always been precise with his hands, but the thread was slightly darker than the original, and the tension was different, tighter, the work of someone sewing in a hurry, with purpose rather than craft. She pulled the thread with a seam ripper from her sewing kit. The key was small and flat, taped to a folded piece of paper. The paper had 4 numbers written on it in Daniel's handwriting and nothing else. Maya sat on the bedroom floor for a moment with the key in her palm. Then she got the box. The combination worked on the first try. Inside, a manila envelope, a burner phone sealed in a Ziploc bag, and a folded letter on top of everything with her name on it in Daniel's careful print. She opened the letter last. She read the other things first, because she needed to understand the geography before she could receive the confession. The manila envelope held bank records, 18 months of deposits into an account she had never seen, regular and substantial, the kind of figures that explained the things she'd never thought to question. Caleb's school, the lease on their apartment, the new transmission on her car 2 winters ago. Daniel's construction salary had never covered any of it. She had never asked how he managed. She understood now that she had not asked because some part of her had not wanted the answer. The burner phone had one contact saved under the letter V. The message thread ran for 2 years. Daniel's side of it was methodical. Dates, locations, names, figures. Brief and precise, and building towards something with the patience of a man who understood that the document he was creating had to be irrefutable before it could be useful. The last message was dated 11 days before he died. It said, "Not yet. Close. Need the 4th floor records to complete it. Will move when ready." There was no response from V. She opened Daniel's letter last. "Maya, if you're reading this, I didn't get out in time. I'm sorry. I know that isn't enough, and I know you're angry, and I need you to stay angry because anger will keep you moving, and moving is what matters right now. Everything I built is in this box and in the building, 4th floor, panel behind the radiator on the north wall. Don't go alone. Don't trust Dmitri. Aleksei doesn't know what Dmitri is, what he's been doing, what he took, who he told. The evidence proves it. That's why they came for me. I was going to give it to Aleksei. I was going to use it to walk away clean. I ran out of time. You haven't. I love you. I love Caleb. I'm sorry I built walls around you when I should have just told you the truth. I thought I was keeping you safe. I see now that I was keeping myself comfortable. Don't sign anything yet. You have more power than he's told you." Maya read it twice. Then she photographed every document, every page of the phone thread, every figure in the bank records. She put everything back exactly as she found it. She closed the box and replaced it under the bed. She sat on the bedroom floor with her back against the mattress and stared at the wall until Caleb called her for dinner. She went. She served the food. She listened to him talk. She smiled in all the right places. She went back to the building on Wednesday. Aleksei wasn't there. She knew before she stepped inside. The air held a different quality without him, looser, like a room after the most important person has left it. Dmitri stood at the base of the stairwell with his phone in his hand and watched her cross the ground floor with the particular attention of a man who has decided something and is waiting for the right moment to say it. Maya nodded to him and kept walking. He fell into step beside her. He said Aleksei had been called to a meeting in Brighton Beach. He said it the way people mention weather when they mean something else, casually, with the specific casualness of information being deployed rather than shared. Maya said she was just there to check the utility readings for a city filing. Lena had asked her to stop by. Dmitri said Lena wasn't in today. Maya said that was fine. She knew where the meters were. He stepped in front of her near the stairwell door, not blocking it entirely, just enough to require acknowledgement. He was half a foot taller and twice her width, and he wore his size the way certain men wore it, not as a fact, but as an argument. "Your husband made promises," Dmitri said, "to certain people above Aleksei, promises about what this building would provide going forward. Aleksei is generous with his explanations. The people above him are less patient." Maya looked at him steadily. That sounds like a conversation for Aleksei. "Aleksei protects what's useful to him," Dmitri said. "Right now you are useful. Useful things have a shelf life. Your husband understood that eventually, toward the end." The "toward the end" landed like he meant it to. Maya held his gaze and said nothing. She had learned in 11 years with a quiet man and 8 months of grief and 3 days in this building that silence was not the absence of power. Sometimes it was the whole of it. Dmitri let the pause expand until it didn't serve him anymore. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward the corridor with the courtesy of a man demonstrating restraint he wanted her to notice. "Utility meters are at the end of the hall," he said. She walked past him without thanking him. The 4th floor was empty when she reached it. She'd taken the stairs slowly, pausing on each landing, listening. The 2 men who worked on the 3rd floor were gone today. The building held the specific silence of a place temporarily abandoned, present and waiting, rather than simply quiet. The 4th floor corridor was dim, the overhead lights on a motion sensor that flickered on as she moved toward the heavy door at the end. She didn't go toward it, not yet. She turned left instead, toward the maintenance alcove where the utility meters were actually housed, because Dmitri might be watching the stairwell camera, and she needed the visit to look exactly like what she'd said it was. She pulled the meter readings, wrote them on the notepad she'd brought, took her time. On her way back down the corridor, she passed the radiator on the north wall. It was a large cast-iron unit, original to the building, painted over so many times the surface had gone smooth. The wall behind it was partially in shadow. She slowed without stopping, let her eyes find the seam where the panel met the plaster, confirmed the gap Daniel had described, barely visible, deliberate, the work of a man who understood concealment. She kept walking. Not today. Not alone. Downstairs, Dmitri was on the phone near the entrance. He watched her cross the ground floor and push through the front door without a word. Outside, she walked to her car and sat inside it and let her hands shake for exactly 30 seconds. She had allocated herself that much. Then she started the engine. She needed her sister's apartment. She needed a night without Caleb asking questions she couldn't answer.
She needed to think clearly about what came next, and she needed to stop going to this building alone.
She went back to the building the next morning with her sister. Renee was 40, practical, and had disliked Daniel with a loyalty that had never required explanation. She stood in the fourth-floor corridor with her arms crossed, while Maya moved the radiator 2 inches from the wall and pressed the panel until it gave. The hard drive was wrapped in a cloth. The ledger was beneath it, bound with a rubber band. The pages dense with Daniel's handwriting. Maya took both and replaced the panel and moved the radiator back, and they were downstairs and out the front door in under 4 minutes. Dmitri wasn't there. That bothered her more than if he had been. Renee's apartment in Crown Heights was on the 3rd floor of a brownstone with good locks and a landlord who minded his business. Maya sat at the kitchen table with Caleb asleep in the back room and Renee quiet in the chair beside her while she opened the hard drive on Renee's laptop. The files were organized the way Daniel organized everything, by date, by category, without wasted space. He had been documenting for 3 years, longer than she'd understood from the burner phone thread. Longer, she realized, than Caleb had been in school. Longer than the transmission on her car. He had been building this while making her breakfast and attending parent evenings and kissing her forehead at midnight, and she had not known. She had not known any of it. She read for 2 hours without speaking. What Daniel had documented was not skimming. The word Dmitri had used, skimming, was a deliberate misdirection, she understood now. What the file showed was a faction inside the Bratva's northeastern operation that had been systematically stealing from the organization's senior leadership in Moscow for 4 years. Moving money through legitimate fronts, rerouting transfers, creating losses on paper that senior leadership attributed to operational costs and competition. The Red Hook building was one of 3 properties they'd used to absorb the discrepancy. Daniel's name on the deed made him the visible explanation for numbers that didn't add up. He hadn't understood that when he signed. By the time he did, the paper trail had been constructed around him with the care of people who had done it before. Dmitri's name appeared 47 times in the ledger. 2 other names appeared alongside it, men Maya didn't recognize, positions she couldn't immediately place, but the pattern was clear, and the documentation was meticulous, and Daniel had spent 3 years making it irrefutable because he had understood from the beginning that the only way out was to make himself more valuable as a witness than as a liability. He had been building a case for Aleksei. Not for the police, not for himself, for Aleksei, who Maya now understood had been just as much a target of the faction's manipulation as Daniel had been. The financial losses attributed to Red Hook had been creating pressure on Aleksei from above for 2 years. Daniel had been watching it happen and assembling the proof that would exonerate them both. He ran out of time 11 days after his last message to V. Maya sat back from the laptop and looked at the ceiling of her sister's kitchen for a long moment. Renee refilled her coffee without being asked. "He got himself killed," Renee said quietly. Not cruel, just factual, the way Renee had always been factual about Daniel. "He got himself killed trying to get out clean," Maya said, "without leaving us exposed." Renee was quiet for a moment. "Did it work?" Maya looked at the hard drive, at the ledger, at 3 years of her husband's careful, doomed, loving documentation sitting on a kitchen table in Crown Heights at 1 in the morning. "Not for him," she said. She closed the laptop and sat with her hands flat on the table and thought about Aleksei's face across that bare desk, the controlled patience of it. The way he'd said Daniel chose this, believing it, she now understood, without knowing what Daniel had actually chosen or why. She thought about what Daniel's note had said. "You have more power than he's told you." She picked up her phone.
She called Aleksei at 7 in the morning and told him she needed to meet. That day, that it couldn't wait. He was quiet for a moment. Then he gave her an address that wasn't the building. The place was a restaurant in Carroll Gardens, closed at this hour, chairs still inverted on the tables. A man she didn't recognize let her in through the side entrance and led her to a back booth where Aleksei sat with coffee and nothing else. No phone on the table, no documentation, just the same quality of stillness he carried everywhere, like a climate. Maya sat across from him and placed the hard drive on the table between them. She watched his eyes move to it, watched him not reach for it immediately. That restraint, she was beginning to understand, was how he thought, letting things arrive fully before responding to them. Daniel built that, she said. 3 years. Everything Dmitri's faction has been moving through your operation. The accounts, the transfers, the names, the losses they've been attributing to Red Hook to cover what they were taking from Moscow. Aleksei looked at the hard drive for a long moment. You've seen the contents. All of it. And the ledger. She put it on the table beside the hard drive. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A subtle recalibration, the internal movement of a man revising his understanding of a situation he thought he'd already measured. He picked up the ledger, opened it, read the first several pages with the focus of someone who already understood the language and was now hearing a sentence completed that had been interrupted years ago. He set it down. How long have you had this? Long enough to make copies, Maya said, which exists somewhere that isn't here and isn't my home, and which will go to people in Moscow who would find it very interesting if anything happens to me or my son. The silence between them was different from the silences she'd sat in before. This one had weight on both sides. Daniel was bringing this to me, Aleksei said. It wasn't a question. He ran out of time. Aleksei closed the ledger and placed both hands flat on the table. The gesture reminded her of herself 2 nights ago in Renee's kitchen, arriving at the same threshold from a different direction. What do you want? He said. Maya had rehearsed this on the drive over, not the words so much as the steadiness behind them, the understanding that she was not asking, she was negotiating. There was a difference, and it mattered in this room with this man. 3 things, she said. Daniel's name cleared internally. Whatever story you've been told about skimming, whatever Dmitri built around him, that ends. He was your asset, not your liability. That's the truth, and I want it acknowledged. Aleksei said nothing. Second, Caleb is untouchable, permanently, not as a courtesy, as a condition. And the third, the building is mine, legitimately, clean paperwork, no operational connection to your network, transferred completely within 90 days. I'll manage it as a property owner, nothing else. Aleksei studied her face. She held it steady and thought about Daniel at the kitchen table doing the same thing, building something careful and irrefutable out of the materials available to him, trying to find the exit that didn't leave the people he loved standing in the damage. You're asking me to move against Dmitri without knowing who else is involved, without knowing how far up it goes. I'm giving you 3 years of documentation that tells you exactly how far up it goes. Daniel did the work. I'm just delivering it. Aleksei looked at her for a long time. The restaurant was very quiet. Somewhere in the kitchen, a refrigerator hummed. How did Daniel find you? He said finally. The question caught her somewhere she hadn't armored. I found him. Aleksei picked up the hard drive, turned it once in his hand, set it in his jacket pocket. Give me 48 hours, he said. Maya stood and pulled on her coat. You have 24, she said, and left.
She noticed the car on the way to Caleb's school. A dark sedan, 2 cars back, that had been 2 cars back since she left her apartment. She turned onto a side street to test it. The sedan turned with her. She drove 3 blocks out of her way, made 2 unnecessary lefts, and pulled into a gas station. The sedan parked across the street and waited. She called Aleksei from inside the gas station while paying for coffee she didn't want. He answered on the first ring this time. She told him. He said 2 words, "Get Caleb." She was already moving.
She pulled Caleb from class at 10:15, signing the early dismissal sheet with a steadiness that surprised her, smiling at his teacher, letting Caleb believe the cover story she invented in the car, a forgotten dentist appointment, nothing interesting. He accepted it with the flexible logic of a 7-year-old and talked about volcanoes the entire drive to his friend Marcus's house, 4 blocks from the school. She watched him go inside, watched the door close. The sedan was still behind her. She called Renee and told her not to go home tonight. Renee asked one question. Maya said yes. Renee hung up. Aleksei called back at 11. He gave her an address in Red Hook, 2 streets from the building, and told her to walk, leave the car, take the long way. He told her the name of the man who would be waiting at the corner of Coffee and Van Dyke and what he would be wearing. She did exactly that. The man was there. He walked her without speaking to a parking garage off Coffee Street, 3 levels down, where 2 of Aleksei's cars were already positioned facing the exit ramps. She counted 4 men she could see and assumed more she couldn't. Aleksei was standing beside the furthest car. He looked at her when she arrived and nodded once, the brief acknowledgement of someone confirming a variable. Then Dmitri walked in. He came down the vehicle ramp on foot, unhurried, with 2 men behind him. He stopped 20 feet from Aleksei and looked at Maya with an expression she recognized, the look of a man who had concluded that a problem had a simple solution and had come to apply it. "She went to you," Dmitri said to Aleksei, not accusatory, almost impressed. "You had her followed," Aleksei said. "I had her watched. There's a difference." Dmitri's eyes moved to Maya. "Whatever she gave you, it came from Daniel's files. Daniel built those files to protect himself. Half of what's in them is fabricated." 47 entries, Maya said. Dmitri looked at her. "Your name appears 47 times in the ledger, with dates, figures, and corroborating transfers. Daniel was precise. You know that better than I do. You worked with him for 4 years. Something shifted in Dmitri's face. Not fear exactly, the recognition of a miscalculation. "The copies," Aleksei said quietly. "To who?" Dmitri said. The steadiness in his voice had developed a fault line. "People who are already asking questions about the Red Hook numbers. People who received an anonymous package this morning with enough documentation to begin a formal internal review." He paused. "That was always going to happen, Dmitri. Daniel built it that way. She just delivered it." The garage was very quiet. Dmitri's 2 men looked at each other with the specific uncertainty of people recalculating who they were standing next to. Dmitri stood very still. Then he looked at Maya with something that wasn't anger anymore. It was almost recognition, one person acknowledging another across the specific distance of a decision that had already been made and couldn't be unmade. He nodded once, turned, walked back up the ramp. His 2 men followed. Aleksei watched them go. When the sound of footsteps faded, he turned to Maya and said nothing for a moment. "Caleb," she said. "Safe," he said. "He stays safe. That was always the condition." Maya leaned against the concrete pillar beside her and let herself breathe. The garage smelled of oil and winter and the specific cold of underground spaces. Somewhere above them, the city was going about its afternoon entirely unaware. She thought about Daniel, about the weight of what he'd carried alone. She understood it now. She didn't forgive it, but she understood.
3 months later, the building had tenants. A ceramic studio on the 2nd floor, run by a woman named Patricia, who played the same jazz record every morning and left clay fingerprints on the stairwell banister. A small shipping logistics company on the 3rd, 4 employees, reliable rent. A freelance architecture firm on the 4th, the heavy door gone, the lock removed,
the north wall replastered and painted the color of mourning, who kept odd hours and left coffee cups on the windowsills facing the harbor. The ground floor office had a desk, 2 chairs, and a plant Maya had bought from a market on Atlantic Avenue because the room needed something alive in it. She managed the building the way her husband should have, with paperwork, with presence, with no locked doors and no questions she couldn't answer. Aleksei came on a Thursday afternoon in early December. She was on the 2nd floor reviewing Patricia's lease renewal when Lena called up to say he was at the front door. Maya came down, unlocked it herself, and led him into the ground floor office. He sat. She stood. He placed 2 things on the desk: the original partnership documents, Daniel's signature on every page, 6 years of quarterly filings, the paper architecture of everything he'd built and hidden. And beneath them, a photograph. Daniel and Aleksei, younger, standing in this same ground floor with their hands shaking and their faces unguarded. Daniel was smiling at something off camera. It was the smile from Montreal, the open one, the one she hadn't seen enough of. She picked up the photograph and looked at it for a long time. "He was trying to get out," Aleksei said, "from the beginning. He never wanted the arrangement to be permanent. He wanted enough to stabilize your family and then a clean exit. When he discovered what Dmitri was doing, he saw the path: deliver the evidence, clear his name, walk away with nothing attached to him." "You told him that," Maya said. "He told V that," Aleksei said. "I was always V." She set the photograph down. "You trusted him," she said. "He was building toward trusting me," Aleksei said. "There's a difference. He was careful. He wanted to be certain before he came forward. The caution that kept him from coming to me sooner is the same caution that built the case, that protected you afterward." He paused. "He was a thorough man." "He was a secretive man," Maya said. "Yes," Aleksei said. "That too." She gathered the partnership documents into a neat pile and held them over the small metal wastebasket beside the desk. Aleksei watched without expression. She lit the corner with the lighter she'd started keeping in her desk drawer for reasons she hadn't fully examined, and set the pile down and watched 6 years of Daniel's hidden life become ash and then nothing. She put the fire out with the lid of her coffee cup. The photograph she kept. Aleksei stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "The building suits you." "It's mine," she said. "It always should have been." He nodded and left. She watched through the window as he walked to his car and drove away and did not look back. She understood that he wouldn't return, that this was the conclusion of a transaction, and that both of them were better served by the clean edge of it. She went to the roof at 5 o'clock. The harbor was going silver in the December light, the water flat and cold and enormous in the way Brooklyn's water always was, indifferent to the city built beside it, older than everything, entirely unimpressed. A barge moved slowly toward the bridge. A plane crossed high overhead, leaving a white line across the gray. She had Caleb's school bag on her shoulder. She was picking him up at 6. She stood at the edge and looked out at the water and thought about Daniel carrying this building inside him for 6 years, the weight of that, the loneliness of it. She thought about Caleb's breakfast table, 2 plates, still, sometimes. She put her hand in her coat pocket and felt the photograph there, its edges sharp and real. Then she turned from the harbor, took the stairs down, and went to get her son.
Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. It keeps these Mafia legends alive. Like, comment, and I'll see you in the next upload.